You're telling me that we have both Republicans and Democrats agreeing that we have a problem?
Yeah.
Wow.
I know.
That doesn't happen very often.
It doesn't, which is why I don't see the de minimis lasting much longer.
So in other words, we screwed up when we moved it to 800.
All right, welcome to another episode of the Decoding Cross-Border E-Commerce Podcast with Zonos. Aaron, we should be able to pull off today's episode because we're talking about the U.S.
Yep.
United States.
But before we jump into this, I was thinking about a question that honestly I don't know if I've gotten to the bottom of it yet. Because if someone that speaks two languages is bilingual and someone that speaks multiple languages is multilingual, what do you call someone that only speaks one language?
What?
American.
Well, we can make fun of ourselves.
Oh,
right?
We're going to make fun of ourselves
all day long.
Oh, yeah. Yep. I am an ignorant American and I'm proud of it. And let's talk about that today.
Yeah, you know what Americans are really ignorant of?
Duties?
Yeah, duties. Hey, you're talking to your neighbor. What do you do for a living, Aaron?
Yeah, I can't explain what I do because it's like people don't relate to it at all here in this, because we're such a huge domestic market that we're just used to like buying cross-border is either not a thing, or if it is, we don't even realize we're buying it cross-border.
But why don't we realize it? Like, why is that happening? Because everybody, if you're in Canada, you know exactly.
Oh yeah, everywhere else
what it is to
here
buy.
In the U.S., we have such a high de minimis that of $800 that when you buy stuff online, it might be shipping straight from China, and you have no idea because it's just coming in duty and tax free.
All that Temu and Shein stuff. We're going to talk about that in a little bit. But before we get to the de minimis, which is going to be a fun part of the conversation, let's talk about tax.
Let's do it.
Okay.
That's simple. Super simple. And I will say in America, we do understand taxes.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, we are. We understand that we hate them.
Yes.
Okay, so how did we talked about this in previous episodes, talking about low value taxes. How did this get started in the United States? And how does it impact retailers that are outside the U.S.? Because this episode is really for those retailers that are outside the United States, shipping into the U.S., and what do they have to look out for?
Well, me being an American, as this was all happening back in, it finally rolled out, was it 2018? Some changes happened, but it used to be when I bought online, if I was buying from another state, I had no sales tax. Hallelujah. Yeah. It was wonderful.
Wait, no, Aaron, you did. You were supposed to, when you did your tax return,
You're right.
You're supposed to state that you bought stuff on Amazon from another.
I have done that, by the way, because I'm that honest. No joke.
Wow.
Yeah.
You and like 5 other people.
I know. But you're right. So it used to be that the state sales tax, when you go to a store inside your state, you pay sales tax, right? And here in the U.S., you've got the cost of the goods, and then they throw on sales tax on top of it at the time of checkout. Well, if you buy from outside the state, they never charged anything. And it was supposed to be that on your annual tax returns, there's a question about any purchases you made outside of the state, and then you're supposed to account for it at that point in time. Of course, nobody does that in practice. So, except for 5 people, I'm being one of them, by the way.
Yes.
So, exclusive group.
But there was one state that got upset about this, right?
Yes.
They wanted to take someone. They took them to court.
Yep. That was one of the Dakotas.
I thought it was North.
I think it's North.
North Dakota versus Wayfair.
Yeah.
Wayfair versus North Dakota.
Yep.
Yeah.
And then that started a whole cascading effect of laws that came down to where now.
Because so real quick though, I mean the listeners probably know.
You jump in.
Wayfair versus North Dakota went all the way to Supreme Court, and this was basically North Dakota saying that even though Wayfair, you don't have nexus in our state physically, and you're not shipping from our state, you still owe a sales tax for selling to the residents in our state, and they won.
Yep, and they won.
And that's when the cascading, massive impact, big uproar. Amazon was the first one to really jump in and start collecting sales tax. At least that's when it was most noticeable for the for Americans when we had to start paying sales tax online.
So now all of a sudden, it's not just having to have a business in that state. If you have a business in that state, a presence, you had to charge sales tax. Now it's like, well, no, if you are selling into our state, we're going to come up with a set of rules that if you're selling a certain amount, you have to start collecting sales tax from all of your buyers that are in our state. And then you have to remit that to us. And everybody, I'm sure every state came up with their own set of rules. Right?
Different thresholds or, I'm kidding. Thresholds, or if they have different ways to define nexus. So you actually might not be triggered with nexus due to sales. It could be due to you have one employee that state.
Right.
Now you have nexus.
So you may now we're talking about a smaller business. Let's just talk within the U.S., which is a small business selling domestically. They might have to charge sales tax in some states and not in others because they haven't reached the thresholds in each individual state. Right?
Yep.
We got that?
Yep.
In the U.S., I always thought that initially I was thinking of that as just kind of an interstate commerce kind of thing inside the U.S. That's all that law impacted, right? Is that right? But that's not actually true, right?
Really?
It's in North Dakota. Anybody outside of North Dakota, and not just inside the U.S., it's anywhere in the world selling in that law impacts. It's not just an interstate thing. It's anybody globally selling into the U.S. has to pay attention to all of these nexus laws.
And I know that's overwhelming for merchants that are outside the U.S. It's like the U.S. is like cross-border in itself. It is like 50 different countries, and we are proud to be American, but we're also proud to be a Texan or a Utah. So
yes, we are.
Yeah.
And it is interesting when you try, like the size of America. It's massive and it's very diverse. And when you travel from one side to another, it's a different culture, different mindset, and of course, different taxes. And even within states, it's not just the same tax rate like here in Utah. It varies by county and municipalities. It's extremely complex.
Yeah, because I think the state taxes, range from 0 to 7.25, but actually the effective tax rate is more than that by state because there will be an additional tax. And California is the highest just state tax amount, which is 7.25%. And then you have some zero state tax locations like Alaska, Oregon. It's always fun to go there and buy stuff because you don't have the state sales tax. But that blended amount can get expensive and difficult to, expensive relative. Not expensive to Europe, relative to Europe, but expensive and difficult to calculate.
But you know what this this whole Wayfair lawsuit did? It sprung up a whole industry around it. I mean, there's some massive companies now that really got their footing with helping companies manage all of these complexities now across all of these states.
Well, look, to just do a plug for Zonos, I mean, we do some of this if you're in the US, we're helping you do exactly this when going to Australia, New Zealand, with IOS with Europe, UK VAT. We've talked about with that low value tax laws. But we're also doing this for merchants that are outside the US coming into the United States and doing the same thing, taking on the compliance, taking on the calculation, all the remittance, and only having to do it by the states that they need to do it into because I actually want to touch on this real quick. There's also a solution out there where you can use a merchant of record solution into the US. What the challenge with the merchant of record solution is if the merchant of record is registered in a state, which they will be all 50 states. They'll probably have nexus. They're going to be collecting tax and remitting sales tax on orders that otherwise you might have been able to still sell to tax-free until you grew to a point where you have nexus. Mm-hmm. And honestly, you have to be a pretty big retailer to hit nexus in every U.S. sales, every U.S. state.
Yeah, so it feels like the U.S. is like a microcosm of the rest of the world and what's happening. It seems like everybody's moving to these tax remittance laws. All the major countries have anyways, where you now as a seller, you have to manage all the different complexities of all these different countries like Australia, New Zealand, EU, UK, Norway, Singapore. And then you've got the US, which is like 50 different ones, right?
It is.
But the that's if you can figure out how to manage that, it's actually not a bad thing necessarily, but it's really complex.
Well, there's a lot of opportunity, but it is complex. Where let's say you're selling it to New York City, you're going to have a reduced tax rate on clothing, and a lot of states have reduced tax rate on clothing, or it's a back to school, tax holiday, or so there's these different sales tax in the U.S. is very dynamic.
But why would you want to go through all this complexity? Why not just not worry about the U.S. and don't sell there?
Well, what percentage of the GDP of the world is the U.S.?
Oh, it's over 25%.
Okay.
So it might be.
All right. So it might be worth
I think the market's over 25 trillion, something like that. So there's 25 trillion reasons why you still want to sell into the U.S., right?
Yes.
Okay.
All right. So we've established you want to sell in the U.S. You're outside the United States. One of your options is you could use a merchant of record solution that just takes over the tax for every tax compliant to every single state, or you could use someone like Zonos, where we're going to help you with making sure you're registered in the states you need to be registered in, and remitting the tax, calculating the tax, and all of that, and then just handling it on your behalf, so you don't have to worry about all the compliance around the tax.
Got it. And so you actually have some of the advantages of the olden days where you may not have to charge sales tax in certain states,
right? Which is
great.
Well, it should be that way if these states are. I mean, in many ways, it's favoring small businesses that are still growing. Mm-hmm. So if this is one of the things, and I love the simplicity that a merchant record solution brings, but I don't love the burden that it puts on small businesses that might want to leg up on some competition. And a way to have a leg up is if I don't have to collect sales tax into Utah or into Texas because I haven't hit Nexus yet, I don't want to put that burden on my shoppers. I would love to pass that savings on to them versus just collect it and remit it, when in reality I'm still a small merchant. But if you use a merchant record solution, you're gonna be stuck doing that. So
got it. No, that makes sense.
Yeah,
makes a lot of sense. So into the US, you've got all the sales tax stuff. Obviously, you cannot manage this without technology. Like this is
no,
and that's the thing about this. You couldn't have done this 30, 40 years ago. The states, it just wasn't feasible. But also back then, it wasn't that big of a deal because e-commerce wasn't that big of a deal.
This is,
right?
Yep.
It was more brick and mortar back then. So kind of the advent of technology brought along the e-commerce wave, but it also the technology also facilitates the solution to make all of this work. So, but there is a complexities of the U.S. around that. However, the U.S. does some things that actually are really simple, like the de minimis. Right? Like there's very little barrier to getting into the U.S. with the de minimis that's $800, and very straightforward. And I would say, I don't know what the percentage, I'm going to make this up, 90+% of e-commerce orders are under $800.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So there's no duty.
No duty. The duty de minimis is $800. What's the tax de minimis into the U.S.?
There isn't one.
There isn't one. But U.S. is
but why is that? Where is tax charged?
Yeah, it's all charged by the states. We don't have a federal tax.
No, it doesn't.
If we had a federal tax, it would be collected when it goes above the de minimis.
Yep.
But it's zero because
there is no
it's like we don't need it to be zero. There is no such thing as a federal tax that gets collected. The states manage it on their own. Mm-hmm. But yeah, that 800 number's high. What long time ago used to be 250.
200.
200. And
that wasn't even that long ago.
No,
2016,
it's Obama,
right?
Yeah, Obama's the one that changed this. I wrote a blog post about this at the time, but about it, just how it definitely advantages. Let me just tell you my beef with the U.S. de minimis. My beef with the U.S. de minimis is it is not reciprocal,
right?
And so when we sell to Canada, they're going to collect it on anything above, duty.
We have USMCA.
So, okay, but the de minimis is different though, because it doesn't matter if the stuff's made in China that's shipping from Canada, right? If it's shipping from Canada to the U.S. and it's made in China,
they gave us a higher de minimis, even on those goods. It's 150 Canadian dollar, which is a whole lot less than 800.
Yeah, yes. So I think that's kind of my, China has no de minimis, so you good luck. when we do our podcast on selling to China for e-commerce, it's going to be a really easy one.
But do you think that is the de minimis there to be reciprocal and facilitate trade, or is it more about us not wanting to deal with the low value?
Well, the word de minimis has to do with us not wanting to deal with the low value shipments. But I think it's been used to. And again, I'm not actually even saying that we shouldn't have it at what it's at. It's just this is my beef more with other countries is we're doing them a huge favor by having a low de minimis and them having high, a high de minimis and theirs being super low.
It's ironic to me that when everybody else has been scrambling to lower the de minimis over the last 8 years, we went the opposite direction. Even though, and in the face of the Wayfair stuff of figuring out how to collect more taxes on all these transactions, we then went the other direction with the de minimis. I'm wrapping my head around the logic, but I can't.
Well, and even in the U.S., if you wanted a tax de minimis, you could create one. Do what Brazil does, right? We had this episode on Brazil just the other week, right? They have state taxes, but they've come up with a de minimis kind of tax calculation, right? Where it's just a flat number for tax coming in.
Right.
So you could find ways to do it. But you
just got to get all 50 states to agree to that because it's their sales tax, right?
Yo, go ahead. Yeah, never mind. That's never going to happen. However, right now, one thing everyone is in agreement on in Congress, it feels like, is we saw the thing with TikTok, right? The TikTok ban. Republicans, Democrats, both are like, yes, doing it for different reasons, but both doing it. And now it's all about Section 321. And Section 321 is the de minimis. This is the $800 de minimis rule. So how is this getting abused?
Wait, I want to talk about that, but first, you're telling me that we have both Republicans and Democrats agreeing that we have a problem?
Yeah.
Wow.
I know.
That doesn't happen very often.
It doesn't, which is why I don't see the de minimis lasting much longer.
So in other words, we screwed up when we moved it to 800. That's a fair assumption?
Yeah, I think we might have overdone it a little bit.
Is that what your blog post said 8 years ago?
Yeah. It said free trade is not the same thing as fair trade,
Okay,
and so
I like that.
I don't see it as a very fair, way to. Yeah.
Because it is being exploited.
Yeah, it is. And
so let's talk about that.
All right, let's talk about. Okay, one is Temu and Shein, right, or any other U.S. retailer. What you can do to exploit the de minimis is you can ship direct. One way to do it, just ship direct from China. And as long as your orders are under $800, there's going to be no duty on that at all. So you save, and there's the penalties that Trump put in place, the 25% penalty coming from China. Yeah, you can, on a lot of goods, you can avoid that tariff by just shipping direct from China. And then this is the one that kind of blows my mind is, or you can just, like, let's say you're in Texas and you have a warehouse in Texas. It's like, why would I warehouse my stuff in Texas? Why not warehouse it in Mexico? So you could still import everything from China. You warehouse it in Mexico and then ship individual e-commerce shipments into the U.S. and get de minimis treatment on all of those. And all you have to do in Mexico is state that it's the reason for import is to export, right? This final destination is going to be exported. You're going to have no duty.
And so instead of one bulk shipment that's over $800, it's going to incur all these duties and fees. You go into Mexico. I assume it's probably cheaper labor and fulfillment too. And now it's just shipping across the border, individual shipments under 800. You just skirt your way around the duty. And this isn't just for cross-border. This is U.S. merchants leveraging this.
It is
to fulfill to their U.S. customers.
Yeah. They're taking advantage of a bit of a loophole, right? Which is
I've heard the argument when people argue against the de minimis changing. I've heard them say it's not a loophole, but I'm not sure how it's not a loophole, because that sounds sounds like
that is the definition of a loophole. You're not breaking the law. Mm-hmm. You're just taking advantage of what they created, and they created a way. So in our e-commerce business, we bought it. We brought in a bunch of containers from China, and I paid a fair amount of duty. And if tariffs get raised as much as they might with, the next administration, depending on, if tariffs go up regardless, now you start doing those calculations. If they didn't change the de minimis, I mean, it would get exacerbated. You could raise the tariff substantially, and then e-commerce, if you don't change the de minimis, nothing will get bulk shipped into the United States. It will all be fulfilled from another country into our country. Nobody. It would make no sense if your tariffs are like at 100%. It would make no sense to ship bulk shipment into the U.S. House it here, and e-commerce fulfill it from here.
And this is having a big impact on U.S. Industries too.
Yeah,
because now the jobs and everything are moving outside the borders of the U.S.
Yeah,
because
if you're a 3PL, maybe I won't put my my fulfillment center in Florida or in Kentucky. I'll put it in Canada or in Mexico, or I'll just ship direct from China. And in Canada, it's slightly different, so you can do the same thing in Canada, but I think you have to do a drawback on the duty, a deferral. Actually, I think is what it is. So you can still avoid a lot of the duty, even if you're going to warehouse in Canada and then ship to the U.S.
Wow.
So you can get all your transit times down pretty much by being really close to the border somewhere and still fulfill really quick. And
well, honestly, there's a lot of people fulfilling pretty quick straight from China too. I think the logistics industry is maturing and getting better and better at getting things cross-border at a good rate and a fast transit time.
Yes. Yeah. No, you're absolutely right. Now this could be another episode. We need to talk about de minimis as its own episode.
Let's table that one for now, because I think that could warrant its own deep dive.
Does everything get de minimis treatment though?
No, not necessarily. Your alcohol, tobacco, those types of things.
That's standard. Yeah.
I've also seen some weird things here and there with like textiles under $250, or sunglasses. We've seen some things come on because they fall into a weird category, but really it comes down to how they were cleared and if 321 was used or not. And that was actually a major carrier choosing to use a different form, like more of a formal clearance process that actually
on something that was under 800.
Very rarely do I see that. I would say typical, if you're doing e-commerce, you're not doing kind of the alcohol, tobacco side of things. It's going to be pretty much everything under $800.
We need an episode on crazy duty and tax bills, and you should throw that one in there, right? It's like, why in the world would this show up in here?
Yep.
That one. I agree. That will be coming. That will be a fun one. But so not everything gets the treatment. Now, when you go over the de minimis, let's talk a little bit about that. What kind of fees can be incurred when you go over the 800?
So you got your duty,
right?
There's no tax collected at customs clearance. That's all supposed to be remitted to the states. But the duty ranges anywhere from 0 to, it can be as high as 35-ish%. I'd say the average, I recall, it's in that 5% range is typical. But then you have merchandise processing fee. If it's a lower value shipment under $2,500, it's usually a few bucks.
So an informal entry.
Yeah,
under 2,500.
It's usually a few bucks. It's nothing crazy, but it's there. And then over a formal entry, it's going to range anywhere between, I think it's 30.
I think it was like 31.67 or something,
up to like 600 and change.
Yeah. So the minimum is 31 if you're doing a formal entry, and I think it can go up to.
And it's based on a small percentage of the value of the
up to like $614. Yeah.
Yep.
There are carrier fees. I didn't look up a lot of them. But USPS is an interesting one because you were talking about earlier how Americans aren't used to paying duty, but every once in a while they have to. And the United States Postal Service, it's rare they have to do it because usually higher value shipments you would send with an express carrier where there's a little more tracking and visibility. And driver collects it cash at the door most of the time.
With the post office.
Yeah.
So you're saying,
the driver's like, hey, give me.
Would you say their
$60
collection, the resources and technology put into that collection process has advanced over the years, or been pretty much the same for
ever since the colonial days? When the customs agent in Boston is asking, for now. What maybe has changed is back in the day. I've been listening to a podcast around a lot of the what customs would do when stuff was coming to the U.S. because there was so much bribery and stuff back in the day. It's like if it was cheaper to for a customs agent to take a bribe, you give them a bribe if it was lower than the tariff, right?
Okay.
So Parliament would lower the tariff just enough to where it would, for the importer, they would just pay the tariff instead of trying to bribe the customs agent, right? They were competing with that. Anyway, I totally got lost. Yes. So yes, USPS, and then their fee can range anywhere from $5 to $17 for collection, depending on how much they're collecting.
So this comes back to us ignorant Americans. And by the way, I just want to give a little defense to the USPS. To your point, it's a very small percentage of shipments that they have to actually go collect on. So it probably doesn't justify putting a whole bunch of resources into it, which is probably why it stayed stagnant and the process is a little
They have their own
old
de
school,
minimis,
right?
Kind of.
Yeah.
Agencies and not that the USPS is a government agency, but USPS is as old as as the formation of our country, basically. So,
but let's say even if it's UPS, DHL, FedEx, the post office, it doesn't matter who it is. If there's duty and tax to be collected, they're going to reach out. Sounds like USPS is very old school and not very advanced when it comes to how they contact you and pay. The other ones probably are a little more electronic based as far as needing to pay, and you have to pay those duty and fees before the delivery, right?
Yeah.
What percentage of Americans even understand what the heck is going on if that occurs?
So I've been doing this a long time. I've probably had less than 10 Americans that I've talked to that can relate to this experience that I've talked to.
And outside the U.S., it's very common, right? Mm-hmm. I think they get it. A lot of this because they bring in cross-border. The de minimis are lower. They're used to having duty and tax collected on delivery. But here in America, we would be blindsided by it if that happens.
Okay. Prohibited and restricted items. Not much that's applicable in e-commerce. However, prohibited means it's not coming in, period. Restricted, yeah, you could get, the right paperwork or license to import it. Dog and cat fur. We just what that
I don't know.
That I can see why Americans would not be that.
Is there much of a market for that?
I think in some places there might be.
In America though?
Oh no.
Yeah.
Okay.
Who
knows?
Big country. I don't know.
Restricted items. This is where you get into, the firearms and that kind of stuff. But I mean, nothing really e-commerce related. It's usually the alcohol, that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. But other than that, selling to the U.S. is a necessary step if you're just going to do e-commerce if you're outside the United States.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Unless you're just doing domestic.
Yeah.
I just don't see why you would not target the market.
Yeah. There's a lot of people here, right? With money. It's a huge, huge economy.
We love unique stuff.
Yes, we do.
Right? It's why I stopped buying my, clothes at Costco because I started matching everybody.
Yeah. So now you just make your own t-shirts, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Which one's this one?
Big Trouble in Little China. Jack Burton, the Pork Chop Express.
And I just go with, I've got 8 kids, so I just go with whatever's free. So I got mine. Do you know
We're
where
going
I
to
got
have to
my
start
shirt?
charging you for that. It's a great shirt.
It is a great shirt.
Yeah.
I like this red.
Well, Aaron, this was another fruitful episode of the Decoding Cross-Border E-Commerce podcast, and can't wait to have another one. Talking about de minimis or talking about crazy duty tax bills. Every time we do this, I can think of a million other episodes we need to do. So it's been fun.
Thanks, Clint.